So we were talking surrealism when we left on Wednesday. And we talked about this guy, Salvador Dali. He's probably the most well-known of all of the surrealists. And as I was saying last week, a lot of people read a lot of things into his work. You know, as I said, the idea of time being relative, an Einstein physics theory, and you got the melted clocks, et cetera, et cetera. And that was it's kind of persisted through his work. But there's something else you got to know about Dali, and that was that he was kind of his own publicist, and he had this really crazy handlebar mustache. It kind of pulled up and it was real long, and he would do things that would be seen as publicity stunts. And so if you look on YouTube, you can even see Salvador Dali on a game show in the 1950s, early television, called What's My Line? So anyway, and so that got him a lot of notoriety and a lot of popularity. But a lot of serious artists and art critics thought that was all over the top. And it took him a long time before art history took him quite as seriously as his work demands. In today's world, trying to get publicity and stuff like that, that's kind of normal. But it was way off the charts back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. So anyway, and this kind of surrealism to kind of bring us up to the point is called dreamscape surrealism, where it's basically painted in a manner that Renaissance artists would recognize, but the subject matter comes right from the subconscious mind. And so anyway, there was another artist who, not quite as famous as Dali, his name's Magritte. And we got another, Natalie, good. Another artist, Magritte. So this is in French, but translated, what this says is, this is not a pipe. What? This is not a pipe? The treachery of images. Oil on canvas. We mean it's not a pipe. I can see quite clearly it is a pipe. So what do you think he meant by that?
That it's not like a real, like, physical 3D pipe, but just a painting.
That's exactly what he was talking about. And at the time, one of the major concerns in art was truthfulness. And all of this stuff that Picasso had said, you know, some 20 years before that, about illusionism is a lie. He would do this, and it is not a pipe. And he's quite right about that. It is a painting of a pipe. And so Magritte, here's another one, The False Mirror, 1928. And as you see, a lot of Dali paintings turned into posters and hung up on walls. This is another one that's actually quite common. the false mirror. And as you can see, it's an eye, but then it's got the deep space here. And that's what pretty much what a lot of Magritte's work does. It plays with spatial relationships and creates these kind of impossible paintings in terms of the subject matter. And so he's like Dali in the sense that this is painted in a way, as I said earlier, the Renaissance masters would recognize, but it's really out of these contradictions, out of this realm of the dreamscape. And we kind of categorize Magritte in that same group. And then there's other people who are in surrealism, and they take a whole different approach. And this is pretty much called, this category of surrealism is called a surrealist object. Object, that's the title of it. Le Dégénère d'Inférieur, fur-covered cup and saucer. So, as this is kind of an impossibility, deep space in the iris of an eyeball, and this is an impossibility. Of course, this probably could be recreated. It's kind of made this an impossible situation, you think? And basically what Merritt Oppenheim did is to take some fur, I think it may be rabbit fur, but I'm not sure. Maybe a number of different animals, but what she had done is glue animal fur to a cup, a saucer, and a spoon. Impossible. And so to the surrealist, they were really interested in the subconscious mind. And in your dreams, which is how many of us, at least the way that they thought, access the subconscious is during our sleeping time, and that in your dreams, you can put together things that are impossible. Time goes all over the place, like Dali's melted clocks, but you dream, if you're one of those people that dream really hard, you know, you could go from being a child, being in the present, to being over in a foreign country, you know, you can go back to third grade, you know, anything, anytime, anywhere. And so I like to characterize it like this. In the physical world, you can't put the square peg in the round hole. But in your dreams, that's actually quite doable. Because the subconscious mind does not conform to the physical reality. And that's what I like about your answer. Physical reality. And so, yeah, this is surrealism. And this is yet another kind of surrealism. I mentioned this earlier, and it was kind of a inspiration for Picasso himself, and this is by the 1930s. And this was generated by means of automatic drawing. And so I'll give you three. There are three major categories of surrealism: the dreamscape, the surrealist object, and I showed you the fur-covered cup, but there are all kinds of things out there that they put together. One of them I remember quite well was that they took a chicken, a plucked chicken, a dead chicken ready to throw in the oven. And they took a pair of high heels and put one high heel on each side and tied it up with twine. An impossible thing, did not make sense, made about as much sense as the fur-covered cup. But it's a concoction of the subconscious. And this, in its own way too, is a concoction of the subconscious mind, in that Miro is doing automatic drawing. He's facing his canvas, which in this case, pretty sizable. It's 5.5 feet by 6'5". So it's pretty big, and he's there and he's just drawing, accessing his subconscious mind through automatism. And so that was used in art. That'll be used for a long time. That'll get picked up by American artists, by the way. We'll study in chapter 31. But I want you to think about this. And I think there are all kinds of ways, historically, traditionally, that human beings have contacted or accessed the subconscious mind. And there was a lot of study going on at this time. There was a guy named Carl Jung. He was a student of Sigmund Freud. He was a psychologist, and they call this Jungian psychology. And he was interested in the subconscious mind. And he developed all kinds of theories. And he talked about how there was this thing we know, or what he called, as the universal subconsciousness. And that universal subconsciousness is what people like Moreau would use to make these automatic drawings. There are people that talk about this, not just in the discipline of painting, but there are people that talk about automatic subconscious talking and singing. For example, chants. Some people call prayer that connection to the universal subconsciousness. And so that meditative state, which is universal all over the world, you get this in Christianity, in Islam and Judaism, in Buddhism, Hinduism, we have all of these people that have learned, they practice meditation. That meditation links them to the universal subconsciousness. And so why not? Why not have artists employing the same methods? And so then there are these other people that are kind of a perimeter. Paul Klee, and he makes these, he has a lot of these. They kind of look like children's drawings to some extent. The twittering machine, and you can see that it is this kind of machine that is kind of out of his imagination. It's got a crank here, and it's got these little birds hooked up and so on. And so because this is out of normal life and out of the imagination, which is another connection to the universal subconsciousness, they link him up with this too. Paul Klee, quite notable. And Wilfredo Lam, The Jungle, 1943. Now, this is kind of an interesting place to put this painting. And if you take a look at it carefully, it kind of looks something like the Cubist stuff, especially the Demoiselles of Avignon. You see the mask and you see the figures, and it looks kind of Cubist in its way. There's a face there and a face there, right here, and so on. So you got to kind of look at it closely, but called the jungle. And Wilfredo Lam was an artist from Latin American artist, and he was doing this kind of work, and it was basically Cubism, and he was also accessing a lot of the cultures from Latin America, the ancient cultures of the Incas and the Aztecs, and as well as the Amazonian cultures and the Caribbean cultures. And so 1943, this is pretty significant because Lam was doing this. Oh, there's another face down here too, just saying. It's so cubist to me, but in 1943, what was going on in the world in 1943? That's a pretty significant bit of information, I think, about this painting. All right. Well, I'll give it away. World War II, which actually began 1939 and lasted until 1945. But what happened and what's significant about that in relation to this painting is that all of those surrealists, or most of them, that were living and painting and practicing their art in France, when the Germans invaded France, they scattered, because the likelihood was that they would end up probably in a concentration camp. Nazis, they didn't like modern art. There's a lot of stuff historically in the record about how they hated modern art and modern artists. They call it degenerate art. And the surrealists were right there on top of it. So they had to leave. Another fact about that, Picasso stayed. Picasso stayed in France during the German occupation. But as I said earlier, you may remember, he was too well known. He was a world figure. The Nazis just had to let him go. They couldn't do anything. They couldn't touch him. But the other people like Dali and a whole host of surrealists came to New York. And what they did was look around and see what they thought was the best art. The art that fit their notions of art. Their art that fit the ideas and ideals and the aims of surrealism, and especially this idea that you access the subconscious mind. And so if you take a look at this painting from that point of view, you could interpret this as being very connected to a lot of the ancient cultures, pre-Columbian cultures of the Americas. And so they loved this guy, Wilfredo Lam. Let's see what I got here. I was going to show you. Okay. I was going to show you Frida Kahlo too, but we'll get to her later. They love Frida Kahlo too, because Haley, was that you that wrote about the two Fridas? Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Surrealists loved Frida Kahlo, and to bring you up to what Kaylee and I are talking about, there's a painting we'll see, and it's called The Two Fridas, and it on a conscious level, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. She's there and she's here. She's two Fridas, same person, and she's got a blood transfusion going between one Frida and the other. And one of them stressed in it's complicated, but they loved it. And this is the same kind of impossibility that they loved. Like the fur-covered cup, like the eyeball with the sky. David,
I actually did see the two colors art piece before.
you did.
Yeah, well, I was in a Spanish class back in high school. We talked a little bit about color.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm liking that. You had a good teacher. I know when I taught at Truman, I had a good friend that taught Spanish. And usually, I mean, like once a semester, we talk about all of the Spanish artists through time. So I talk about some of the same people here, Velázquez, Goya, Frida Kahlo, Picasso, so on. Dali's a Spaniard. Yeah, awesome. And I want to show you this. Piet Mondrian. This is a whole different thing. It's not surrealism anymore. This is about design and design theory and this idea of reductivism, for want of a better term. I showed you the Malevich, the airplane, supremacist composition. And it was just a bunch of rectangles and a white field. Well, Malevich, in a lot of ways, was ahead of his time. And I'll run this up a little bit here. I'm going to show you this. Bauhaus, 1925, 1926. But Walter Gropius was the head of Bauhaus. And basically, it was an attempt to link art, architecture, furniture design, sculpture, try to put it all together in a single kind of overarching idea that less is more. That's a phrase that'll come up in the 1960s with minimalism, but I'll back up here because Mondrian was associated with Bauhaus, and he made many of these paintings, and they all have the same title, composition with red, blue, and yellow, and they're all put together the same way. Black grid, and inside the grid, blue, yellow, and red areas. Geometric shape. They're not always squares, but they're square, rectangular, whatever. But it's all right angles. So, did anybody ever tell you about the right angle? The 90-degree right angle? You know, they say the right angle does not exist in nature. And so you see, these are all 90-degree angles here. Everything we have in here is a 90-degree. So much so that early satellite photography, when they wanted to find any, try to find out where there was human activity, spy planes and spy satellites, and they would look for right angles, because where there was a right angle, there was some kind of human activity, whether it was building a house or in some cases deploying missiles, the nuclear missiles on Cuba. The right angle, it's found not in nature, but it's just a human idea. And this idea here too, red, blue, yellow. What are those? Yes, they are primary colors. So it's primary colors, white and black. And as you guys know, most of you know, especially if you're an artist working with color, you know that from these three colors, you can make all of the other colors of the visible spectrum. And so these are color reduced to its simplest form. Everything is reductive, simpler, cleaner, and the Bauhaus and Mondrian actually specifically, this Bauhaus had this idea that all of this old art that we've been studying all this time was too crazy, too busy, too confusing. It on some level agitated human beings and caused this kind of disruption. And so if you think about some of the old architecture, and it's got nothing but flowers and spires and all kinds of ornamental stuff and little statues and everything. Gothic cathedral, the whole facade is busy, busy, busy. And this is like the polar opposite of that. And so there was this idea, and I remember reading in Art in America a long time ago, they talked about the road to utopia. And it was a piece about Bauhaus and Mondrian. And they thought they could actually affect human behavior. It could affect sanity, if you will, by making everything simple, calm, reductive to its basic form. And so this is what it looks like in painting. Constantine Brancusi was doing that with representational sculpture, and it says the newborn. And it's basically what you see there is a sculpture of an egg, and it's basically reduced to a very simple form. And this is the one you had, David. Bird in space. And it's kind of hard to see it as a bird, but if you've seen these birds of prey, especially like hawks and sometimes eagles, and they sit up straight, they throw their chest out, and they sit up and wait for prey. Or they're a water bird like a bald eagle and dive down to catch the fish. Or if they're an owl or a hawk, they watch for that rodent running across a cornfield. They swoop down. But that's really the kind of bird we're talking about here. A large bird. And this is it. This is the bird reduced to its most simple, fundamental, basic, essential form. And so Brancusi is like in this group, and they kind of differed from one artist to the other in the architects, but Barbara Hepworth reducing sculpture, and in her case, what she makes a statement, if you will, about it's very reductive and it's very simple. It doesn't really represent things. It kind of is something. That gets to be part of the dialogue too. But the important part, at least to my mind, is that this is a relationship between the positive shape and the negative space. And you can see the negative space kind of echoes or reiterates the overall shape of the object. And you see the negative space You can see part of it over here. So it's really about space in the same way that you would talk about this as being about flatness and color. And that's another essential part of the Mondrian too, is that it is flat. There is no depth, not like we've been saying 400 years. It is truly, oh, Mackenzie, gotcha. Glad you're here. So, Brancusi, Barbara Hepworth, Henry Moore. And his work is what they would call a little bit more figurative, reclining figure. And it does represent in its own way a person, but it is like Picasso, extremely abstract to the point where you have to kind of use your imagination to see how this could be a reclining figure. Now, I could throw a couple of things out there. This is a head, I'm thinking, and it's got this Hepworth kind of thing where the negative space plays an important role in the artwork, just like this. The difference being that this is this oval sculpture, and this refers to something else, a human figure. But you can kind of see parts of it. You can imagine this as a leg and this as the other leg. You can see this is the shoulder and the arm. You can see kind of falls apart on the torso, but you know, it's there. It's meant to be there. It's abstract in the sense that Moore takes what he wants from the human reclining figure and leaves the rest, fashions this on his own. Well, so I got a question for you. Out of these two sculptors, Barbara Hepworth and Henry Moore, who do you think was the most popular during their lifetimes?
I would say Henry,
And why?
because the way his sculpture uses negative space and compared to the other artists, I would say makes it more interesting to look at from different people, since it has like a lot more. It's bigger.
Yeah, well, I'm liking what you're saying, David. I think you're right. And I think everything you said is true. I think that along with all that you said, because this is really very complex, you could really spend a lot of time going around this object and seeing it from various angles, and I agree with that. There's another aspect of this too, and that is that I'm not so sure that most people were quite ready for something that was totally not representational. So at least with this, you can kind of connect it, even if it's a little bit of a stretch, but you can see that it is a reclining figure. Whereas this is oval sculpture, you know, she's not giving you any clue. And you almost have to be an artist or a designer to kind of understand those principles of weight, shape, positive space, negative space, etc. And so, yes, David.
I would say another reason why I would think Henry's sculpture, the reclining figure, is more interesting is because it clearly has that wood texture to it, which like shows that like it's kind of impressive. He took a lot of time like carving that elm wood into that.
Yes, yeah, you're right. And I think that you hit on about 2 or 3 themes right there, and what you said. And I think that one is that craft. I think craft still, and even yet today, there's this idea of craft, and craft is impressive. And you don't quite know about this. Could have been just, it's a plaster cast, and but this, you can see the marks on it. You can see that he's had a rasp and different kind of shapers and things. And so you see that. And another thing that you hit upon that I like, and we'll see this come up again too, is that by the 1960s and stuff, artists will really turn to materials because we'll see another resurgence of this reductivism, and it's called minimalism, and it pretty much the 60s and the 70s, and they were all into materials. And so, yeah, there's some pretty good thoughts. I like that. And so here's something else here too. This is kind of way out there. When I studied art history, we didn't even look at this kind of stuff. Of course, I'm 67 years old. And when I was your age, I was like 20, which was like almost 50 years ago. Anyway, that was still during the Cold War. And this stuff like this is Soviet art, Soviet Pavilion Paris Exposition. And this was considered to be communist propaganda back in my day. But I think we're looking at it today in terms of the artistic value. The ideological value is kind of long gone. But this is actually in some way kind of a very interesting sculpture. And the message is clear too. And you would say, workers of the world unite. And that's who these two are. They are workers. I'm thinking he's got a 5-pound sledgehammer in his hand, and she's right there with him, and they are together. They are workers. And that's really what communism, at least their art, aspired to be. A celebration of workers. It was quite radical for its day. And again, kind of seen as too communist for a lot of people. But yeah, stainless steel. Look at this, 78 feet high. And another thing about the material too, is it's stainless steel, which is what the gateway arch is. That's a relatively new material in 1937. And stainless steel, you can do a lot of things with it, but the one thing it's not supposed to do is rust. It stays silver, it doesn't deteriorate. So anyway, this is what was going on behind the Iron Curtain, if you will. And here is a model, a reconstruction of the lost model. And Vladimir Tatlin, another Russian, as I was saying earlier about the suprematist, and we saw Kazimir Malevich and some of the other suprematist artists. They had, after the October Revolution, it was really about communism. And this was supposed to be, this was a mock-up or a maquette, a model of something that never was built, but it was supposed to be this gigantic building structure. It's got this spiral, and it's got a rectangle, it's got a triangle, and it's got a cylinder on the bottom. You know, it's got all of the geometry. And actually, the proposal was that the government of Russia was supposed to be housed in this thing. So the Duma was supposed to meet, which is like their Congress and stuff. And so anyway, they were, before the communists took over and made them do stuff like this, they were on the cutting edge of art, architecture, all of this abstraction. And I'm going to point you to this little piece here of this. And that is a sculpture. I showed you Namdabo, the piece that's made out of glass and plexiglass. It's a tube shape. And this is the kind of abstract sculpture we've seen in Russia. And so anyway, these people are in here because some of these people, including Malevich, when Stalin rose to power, all of these abstract artists, they had to leave too. And a lot of them ended up affiliated with the Bauhaus, with this simplistic idea, the reductivism. And so anyway, this is Adolf Loos Villa Müller. And this is an early example of that kind of architecture. Very stark, very austere, very plain. And here is the Schrader House by Gerrit Rietveld. And this was built in the Netherlands. And I want to kind of point this out too, because as I was saying, Bauhaus had its own set of rules and ethics, and they had clear ideas about reductivism. Take a look at this. If I had the slides, I should have brought them, but I don't want to talk about this forever. We could do a whole course on Bauhaus. But the inside and the outside, to an extent, looks like a Mondrian painting. And if you went inside, you would really see that, because you see the geometry of red, blue, and yellow, and that's. I hope everybody's okay. So it's geometric. It's basically the white and black grid with this little splash of red, but on the inside it has some blue and some yellow, and it's basically a Mondrian painting. It's the kind of place that the Bauhaus would have envisioned Mondrian's paintings to be hanging on the wall. And there is the Bauhaus, and that is their headquarters, shop block. And they did a lot of work there. They did a lot of design work. They designed furniture. They designed things like dinnerware, plates and knives and forks and stuff. Teapots, pots and pans, furniture of all types, etc. And so it was basically, it was a group, and they wanted to redesign everything. And they had a lot of those people who were refugees from Stalinist Russia here looking at them. And here is the kind of furniture. Obsolete chair. And this is that redesign of everything Bauhaus associated. This is a little different. It's not particularly Bauhaus, but there were a lot of people doing other kinds of things. And it's from the Bauhaus archive. But you see, I want to talk about this just briefly, that instead of having a tapestry that would have people on horseback or naked figures or any of the other stuff that you'd see on tapestry, a forest scene. Look at it. It's all geometry, it's all color, it's all different patterns, but you can't find the image in there. And again, this is not quite as reductive as the rest of what you see in Bauhaus, but again, it's a redesign. Mies van der Rohe, model for a glass skyscraper. And check this out. Does this look like anything that you see nowadays? This is kind of the prototype of what will be modern architecture. And of course, you can see a lot more of the glass and all of the floors, more than you would normally. But the idea of big glass box skyscrapers, that comes out of this. Van der Rohe was a Bauhaus architect. And like it or not, there was this kind of idea that inside this glass skyscraper would be compartmentalized, and every compartment would be the same as the next, and so on. There was a kind of egalitarianism going on. And so anyway, but Mies, he comes over to the US too, and he does build some of those glass box skyscrapers. And again, check this out. Le Corbusier. Corbusier is in France, 1929. Corbusier has a long career, and he basically he does work worldwide. And this idea, like I say, in architecture, these ideas persist for a long, long time. Oh, here we go. I was telling you about the Nazis. Here's Hitler, and it's something here. ADAH Ernst. This was actually called the Kunst show. The show of degenerate art. And basically what Hitler did was they just gobbled up a lot of this stuff and they made fun of it and talked about how it was nonsense and degenerate and so on. So Hitler starts Second World War, everything goes away, at least for a while. And let's do the slideshow from the beginning. And let me see if I got the right share. Looks like it. Modernism in the United States and Mexico. The US, because today in the 21st century, America is kind of like seen as a world leader in a lot of things, and including in the arts. But 100 years ago, or in this case, 115 years ago, they were kind of behind. They weren't modernists per se. they kind of still rejected a lot of that European stuff, especially surrealism, especially Dada and all that stuff, Cubism. Cubism. I showed you the Marcel Duchamp painting, Nude Descending the Staircase, and it's kind of futurism, it's kind of cubism. Well, they had a big show in 1913 in New York, and they showed all of this new art from Europe. One of the people that attended that show was President Theodore Roosevelt. He wasn't president at the time, he was already out of office. But bottom line is that he said Cubism looked like an explosion in a shingle factory. He thought it was all ridiculous, as did most Americans. So they don't buy into a lot of that stuff. 6th Avenue and 13th Street, New York City. And so they were basically painting, they were Americans, and a lot of them were painting America. And so collectively, they called a lot of these artists American scene painters. They were painting scenes from America. And you can see what Sloan and some of the others, they had a couple of groups in New York at the time. One of them was called the Ashcan School, and the other was called the Eight. They were both, they kind of looked at European Impressionism and employed that loose brush stroke and that optical mix of color and stuff. It's not really polished, which is why the critics said it was Ashcan worthy. But bottom line is that they painted the American scene. Oh, here's that Nude Descending Staircase. I didn't show it to you yet. Yeah, this is Duchamp, the guy with the urinal. Before he did the urinal, he was a painter. And this is Nude Descending a Staircase. And it's kind of like futurism. We showed you Giacomo Balla, Dog on the Leash. That's futurism. We saw Demoiselles of Avignon, Picasso, Cubism. Duchamp, he's trying to kind of do both of those things. And this is the painting that Teddy Roosevelt remarked on. An explosion in a shingle factory. This is all crazy stuff. But it did influence some American artists. Arthur Dove, Nature Symbolized. And these are floral shapes, and this is flora up close. And as a result, pretty abstract. Marsden Hartley, another guy doing kind of abstract art, portrait of a German officer, and a lot of symbolism, not an outright portrait. You can see it's kind of more design oriented in its own way. A lot of emphasis on the patterns and the symbols. And so some of these people are picking up on some of the ideas, but whoa, I forgot who talked about this. Reagan, was that you? Hot Stillscape for 6 colors. And again, this is 1940. Stuart Davis was a guy who admired Picasso and admired Cubism. And so this is kind of a quasi Cubist painting, flat color, take your subject matter, break it up into various pieces and put those pieces back together. That's really what this is. This is right out of Cubism. And as a matter of fact, Stuart Davis, he was a guy who advocated for a more modern art. And he was kind of a champion of Cubism in America. And he had an arch rival, a guy we know, Thomas Hart Benton, who thought all of this European stuff was baloney. And so where I'm going with this is this. A lot of politics kind of play into this too. And after the First World War, America became very isolationist and didn't want anything to do with European art, European culture, any of that stuff. It's all none of our business. And here is another guy, paints quasi-realistically, and you can still see the subject matter, My Egypt. What he painted, he was a guy that was a real big fan of the industrialization of America. And these lines that cross both ways, any idea what that represents? Yeah, this is a factory, absolutely. How about these lines that go? Light, that's exactly right. And we saw some of that in Orphic Cubism, Delaunay in Paris. One of the subjects is light itself, and that's what makes this different, but these are paintings of, oh yeah, I forgot to put these guys up, of American industry. And this is Georgia O'Keeffe. She'll go on later to move out to Taos, New Mexico, and paint flowers, close-up versions. But in the early days, in her early career, she was like the rest of them, painting the American scene. And this is New York at night from 1929. But here we go, another American scene painter, Edward Hopper, Nighthawks. And I put a bunch of other junk in here because this is like a really famous painting, and it's at the Art Institute in Chicago. And it's, how many of you seen this before in some way, shape, or form? Good. Because it has been used for a lot of things. I've seen versions of this with like Marilyn Monroe and Elvis, James Dean, and Humphrey Bogart, different people. What the original painting here is about, in a strange sort of way, was that America was moving a lot more towards the world we know today. And back in 1942, it was still kind of an odd thing to see a restaurant open in the middle of the night, open 24 hours. Now it's like common. But this is in a neighborhood where everybody's long been asleep. And these are the only people out and about. And it's about America. And it's the American scene painting again. And so anyway, but I did elaborate on this one. Got Homer Simpson, another takeoff on Edward Hopper, Nighthawks. Mario, Nintendo, just saying. Big Bird, Bert, Ernie, Kermit, just saying. And I think if I could get this, it's Jim's Diner for Jim Henson, the guy who created Sesame Street. All right, just saying. But yeah, these things have kind of gotten a life of their own. Aaron Douglas, Noah's Ark. And again, this kind of cubist idea of portraying or painting the light. And you could see the storm, the lightning, the lights coming through Aaron Douglas, African-American artist of the 1920s. There was this real emergence of a lot of African-Americans in the arts. Of course, in the music, we all know about, but in the visual arts, there were a lot of African-Americans making great art at the time. And so Aaron Douglas, one of the first, Romy Beardsley, Bearden, excuse me, another one. But you see, look at the profiles here though, too. This is right out of Africa. And so anyway, but then, you know, there were people like James Baldwin and just tons of great artists. And here's another, Aaron Douglas, From Slavery Through Reconstruction. And it is a history of African America. And again, you see these lights, how he's portrayed this. But you see here, cotton, people picking cotton. And you see over here, the trumpet. You see over here, maybe James Baldwin, maybe Langston Hughes figure, and pointing to the house upon the hill. You see another musician here. From Slavery Through Reconstructions, Aspects of Negro Life, 1934. So yeah, Douglas was right there with a lot of other great artists in America. It's finally Jacob Lawrence, another great African-American artist. And as you see in a theme here, not only with African artists, they're actually portraying life as an African-American 100 years ago or so, 1940, 1941, the migration of the Negro. And you see this? Segregation, white people on that side, black people on that side. And that's what he's painting about, segregation. And one of the things that Jacob Lawrence painted about too, and if you get a chance to get like one of those coffee table books or go online and see a lot of his work, he really documents what life was like for African Americans at that time, the migration of the Negro. What that refers to is that in the 1930s and 1940s, a lot of black people were giving up living in the South and moving north to work in the factories. And the factories were popping up like dandelions all over the north. And so you got this industrialization that's happening in places like Cleveland, Detroit, St. Louis, Chicago. And so factories making things like airplanes and automobiles and stuff. And so being a sharecropper in Mississippi was not very attractive. So large numbers of these people got on, saved up the money, got on a train and came up north. And what they found up north was that in some cases there was employment and stuff and more opportunity, but then a lot of this nastiness too, segregation and discrimination and stuff. And so anyway, this is a story about somebody that had a Jacob Lawrence painting and didn't even know it. And she went to a Jacob Lawrence exhibition, he's long since been passed, and saw The name of the show was The American Struggle. And she had one of these Jacob Lawrence paintings in her house. Didn't even know it. She said, man. Anyway, that's what this is about. And that happens from time to time. And this is the formerly missing panel. There are combustibles in every state. A spark might set fire to. It's all about the struggle, the race riots, just another American scene painter, Grant Wood. This is in the Chicago Art Institute as well. How many of you seen this before? Yeah, good. We're 3 for 3 here. I like it. Anyway, yeah, this is another like the Edward Hopper. It's been used for a lot of things, and people have used it. They used to sell cornflakes with this painting. You watch reruns on Nickelodeon, whatever that is, or Green Acres, they show a picture at the beginning of that show with Ava Gabor and Eddie Albert and the pitchfork. Famous American painting. Bottom line, American scene. American scene painters. And that's really, I showed you some of the outliers, but the overall theme of this American art is art about America. Grant Wood is from Iowa. As a matter of fact, if you go up to Eldon, Iowa, this house still stands. This is like a tourist place. And they'll take your picture with the pitchfork and stuff if you go there. It's kind of cool. Anyway, Grant Wood. And another guy, American scene painter from Missouri, Thomas Hart Benton. Pioneer days and early settlers. And of the two, a lot of Benton's work has been it's been criticized in modern times because Benton was not very woke. He had this kind of traditional idea. See, like here, this settler, teaching this Native American Mohawk how to use a rifle, it's always about, he had a lot of racism in it and stuff. But bottom line is American scene. We can't get away from that. That is really what's happening. And there are, at the old post office here in St. Louis, there's a Thomas Hart Benton mural. There's one at the state capitol. He was really kind of the native son artist. Jose Clemente Orozco, American Civilization, Hispano-America, American scene painting from a Mexican point of view. And you see Pancho Villa kind of character, dictator, general, just, anyway, it's getting close. Diego Rivera was the husband of Frida Kahlo. Ancient Mexico, history of Mexico, a detail. Again, like Thomas Hart Benton, like Grant Wood, like Orozco, American scene. And I'm going to leave that. There's the two Fridas. And this is where we'll pick up on Wednesday. What do you think? Because I got a lot to say about this, and we got so little time, just a couple of minutes. Any questions? Any comment? Senny. I know you don't want to go, but it's time. Closing time. Supersonic. Semisonic. Okay. So finish your whiskey and beer. Closing time. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Just saying. End meeting.